Hey Frank, how are you today?
Hey Amanda, I am doing well. How are you?
Good. We are going to continue we're almost through our videos about brand strategy and the essentials of building a brand. Can't believe it.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
excited. It's been fun.
Me too. Today we're going to talk about position. But can you kind of recap what we've already covered in our videos?
Yes. So for a quick summation, we have covered purpose and vision, and again, all of these things ideally are in order, right? Just because it helps when you think through things from a higher level to a lower level. So we have purpose and vision, which is why you exist beyond money. We have brand identity, which is what you want to be aspirationally, right? We looked at a model for that. Growth goals or revenue goals, and those could be one and the same, but what you need to achieve, right? The criteria for measuring success. So what is it you want to achieve, numerically? And then category. So last we talked about category as far as, what group of solutions do you fall into in the market? And then we just broke that down into existing, modified, and new. So which category do you play in? That's the summation.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So moving right along then, when we talk about positioning or point of view, I guess, how would you define that?
So we should start positioning, by the way, within the series is like my favorite thing to talk about. It's even those things we just mentioned, I think are all leading up to this, right? Like how you actually express yourself to the world, what you become known for, all that good stuff. So we define positioning in two ways, put simply. The first is as an exercise. So it's a thing you do as a company. It's practicing what story are you going to tell. It's deciding on the narrative that you're going to tell. And then the second is an idea in the sense of like, how does your customer understand or perceive what you do? So hopefully those two things become aligned, right? As far as the narrative you want to tell, as far as what you're known for. But that can also just be defined by your customer as, oh, we know this company does this. That's how they see you in that case. An example of that, for example, in the B2B space, for those who are familiar. So we have HubSpot and Salesforce. So really two popular companies. HubSpot, as of, I don't know, a long time now, has been known as the inbound marketing CRM. There may be other inbound marketing CRMs, but just the fact that they were kind of first to own that category to a certain extent, that's really their focus, that's their positioning, and that's what they're known for. Then you have Salesforce, and Salesforce was, and their positioning has changed a little bit over time, but they were the first cloud-based CRM, right? They made it a lot easier. They were probably one of the first within that platform. But even now, that positioning has become, as far as how they stand out, is as opposed to HubSpot, they're a lot more enterprise level. They're probably focused on heavier outbound teams. They have a lot of features that might be more complex, but they probably focus on enterprise. They're known as a solution for enterprise level businesses, or at least work in that way more. So certainly a lot of overlap between those two companies, but at the same time, they kind of each have their distinct, like, hey, this is really what we're best at a certain extent. I don't know if you'd have more thoughts on that. I know you've had the Salesforce HubSpot talk plenty of times. So.
I have, and I think that companies underestimate positioning, because they think if we just have a good product, like people will understand, or that they will just realize that we have a good product. And we've talked about this before, and I know that we'll probably talk about it a little bit today. Like you can do one really unique thing for everybody, or you can do everything for one really unique group of people.
Totally.
And it's important to identify which of that you want to be. And even in the example that you listed, HubSpot versus Salesforce, while they are direct competitors, they're not. And it allows them both to have a really solid space in the market, just because they really defined their position. Both of them have defined their positioning well, so that they can have deep market penetration without and they're probably, there are other ones out there, but those are the ones that we run across the most. It's just allowed both of them to have a healthy place in the market without kind of cannibalizing each other, I guess.
Yeah.
That probably sounds blurry, but
no, that makes total sense, right? And I think that you're totally right. That's why positioning is one of the most powerful tools that can be used. That's what it does. It creates space for someone else. Sure, we talked about creating a completely new category, But even that is just creating a new space to play in. You're either going into someone else's playground or you're creating your own. But either way, positioning is how companies can take market share and earn market share and have some skin in the game when there are still other competitors in the market. And like you said, sometimes it can get to the point where it's like, oh, they actually don't even directly compete anymore because they're focused on such unique things. So yeah, I totally agree with that.
Well, how would you say that you should think through positioning? Like what's the process?
Sure. So positioning is it's a fancier way of saying how you frame the problem that you solve for. So like a lot of things, there are probably endless ways to frame what you do. There are so many options, and that's a good thing. And one thing I'll mention with that is that when it comes to positioning, companies can actually benefit from taking a step back to who they've traditionally been and observing all the opportunities they have to position themselves. So one solution, your actual solution may be able to be framed 50 different ways. One of my favorite examples, you know that this is one of my favorite examples, is Oatly, the oat milk company. For whoever's familiar with it, great. If not, go check them out. But they became known for this slogan of "It's like milk, but made for humans." Right. So just that positioning alone is very different from 100 other oat milk companies saying we're plant-based, we're this and that. Right. Like it's the same solution, it's the same product, but they're framing it totally differently. And all of a sudden, they're one of the most successful plant-based companies in the world. A lot to be said about that, but that's what we're talking about here: is how can you look at things through a different lens so that your business can benefit through. Oh, I'm going to cut to the chase. People understand things from simple narrative language. The story that you tell can be told 100 different ways. If you find a way to tell that just resonates with people, you're going to find a lot more traction. You're going to have a lot healthier of a business. People are going to understand the value of what you do more. So that's really when we talk about like how do we think through positioning, it's really pulling back and saying, okay, what are our options as far as the narrative that we want to tell? Even with the same product, it doesn't mean you have to change your product. Just framing it differently. It's putting it differently. I hate to say spin, putting a different spin on it because that sounds very, I don't know, salesy. I think it undermines the value and legitimacy of what's being done. But yeah, whatever your brand is, whoever you are, however you represent yourself, there's a variety of ways to pull back and take, a unique or different angle, like you said, so that you can create space to have success. Yeah. Any other thoughts you'd have on that? And we can talk about kind of like how that's measured, but.
Well, I know we're going to talk about it, but it reminds me so much like the Mr. Clean's magic eraser is a sponge that's like touted to fix everything. It's literally
it does. I can attest to that.
Very fine-grained sandpaper.
Yeah.
And it just has a different application. And I know we're going to talk about this, but even I'll stop. There's hurdles, there's challenges to doing this. What are they? Like, what do people need to keep in mind?
Yeah, I will absolutely test the magic eraser. By the way, I used it this morning. I love it. My wife loves it.
I do too.
It's literally magic. It's crazy. Yeah, so this comes from a variety of different places. I'll credit Section 4 and Scott Galloway and that team for learning this model. You might see it other places. It's called like the 3 hurdles as far as positioning your business. So we have differentiation, relevance, and sustainability. Again, that's differentiation, relevance, and sustainability. So differentiation is very simple. It's how do you stand out from other players that do the same thing as you might do or have the same product? How do you stand out? And that involves, you just said before, you either probably solve for a very unique challenge or you solve a common challenge in a very unique way, right? Mm-hmm. But then you have relevance. So relevance is just measured in does what you offer matter to people? Do people think that matters? And if so, how much, right? How many people are interested in that point of differentiation and finding value in what you do? And then sustainability is basically how do businesses build moats around what they do to maintain a competitive advantage? How do they not, just allow people to copycat? And this is a huge, huge, huge strategy that we use. It's contracts that many, many companies use, and is very worth thinking about because differentiation, what you do differently, is fairly at odds with relevance, right? The more unique or standout you are, the harder it might be to find relevance. So that's what we talked about when you're creating a brand new category, i.e. Airbnb or Uber, very differentiated when they first came out, but finding relevance, finding people that were like, yeah, I'm down for this. Absolutely. Took a little while because people were like hesitant to that idea, right? An easy example too, if we're explaining it super simply, is a Ferrari versus Ford. Ferrari, really nice vehicle, very differentiated car, very differentiated price point. That is relevant to, as far as like people who can actually buy it and are interested in buying it legitimately. Much fewer people, whereas like Ford, not super differentiated, but relevant to a high number of people across the market. And so those are always things to be thinking about when you're thinking through positioning your brand. We've done this a lot. Think through those three things. Is it differentiated? Is it relevant? And can it be sustainable? I.e., can you own it in your market? Can you win that category in some way? And other examples of that might be, Netflix and Apple TV, right? And positioning can change over time, but Netflix, for example, they were certainly a category creator at the time when they first came out. I don't know, what was it, 2006, 8? I don't remember, sometime around then. But they were one of the first entertainment subscriptions at the time, even when they had those DVDs before everything was cloud-based, even before streaming. Whereas now their differentiation, kind of their what they own is just being very prolific with content. They're always putting out new content. Is it the highest quality cinema? Certainly good quality, but their thing is like, you can always go to Netflix and expect something new, kind of unique categories, things that people don't focus on. Whereas Apple TV, we all know Apple's quality, their design quality. And so when you go to watch an Apple TV series, it's likely much higher quality, writing, probably more unique and bespoke content. The cinematography is much more intense, probably to match Apple's aesthetic and design, right? Like, those are commonalities, but there's room for both of them. Why? Because they all serve a unique audience or a unique interest point in a market. I don't know if that was too complex or not, but yeah, the main point is differentiation, relevance, and sustainability is how we measure a good position. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. If you ever watch an episode of Shark Tank, if they cannot find an investor, it's because they fail in one of those three areas. You need to have a different product that stands out, that's appealing to a very relevant group of people, that is sustainable, that can, and sustainability can come in with budget and profit margins and manufacturing and all of that. And you can kind of just see it in miniature when you watch just one episode. You can see however many different products, and if you notice, the judges drill on those three things, or the investors drill on those three things, because if a product or a company fails in that, it's not going to exist long term. And that's just really why it's so important.
Yeah, oh man, that is an excellent point, Amanda. Because like you'll see people come in there. I remember seeing one product. It was like a $40,000 like at home boxing home workout thing or whatever, and it was highly unique, very unique. And they're like, who's gonna buy this? No one had bought. Like, it was not a successful company. Why? Very little relevance, in the sense that people don't have $40,000 to spend on this very futuristic built Peloton or whatever it is. But yeah, excellent example. That's so true. Those are always being measured big on your entire business, which I think is represented by your position too. So yeah, great thoughts.
What kind of things should people take into consideration when they're working on their positioning?
Certainly what we just talked about, right? Differentiation, relevance, et cetera. That's our, I can't stress that enough. But a couple things to think of a little bit more around the how, especially as a service-based business or even in a B2B space, is your narrative is where you usually start, right? And we talked about brand identity. Always focus on that first. Who are you? What are kind of the unique strengths about what you do, right? We don't want to make it too complex. It's not rocket science. It's, what do we do really well? How can we start there? That's our starting point. And then build a unique narrative off of that. Start saying, like, how can we frame this? How can we look at these things differently? How can we approach this and maybe take a different angle to it? But even with that, your narrative is the first step, but you really have to start backing that up through everything that you do. It has to be represented in your pricing. It has to be represented in your product delivery. It has to be represented in your social presence. It has to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because if you start, you can't just switch the light on and start saying things that aren't actually true. And there's a delicate balance there, but that's the first thing to consider. Start with narrative, but maybe start testing it out in the sales process. If you want to shift how you do things, or you want to shift your pricing, or your position on the problem that you solve, start testing it out, asking how people are going to be interested in it. Even if you're an enterprise company and you're launching new products, you probably have the money to do some testing, to do some research, to do some conceptual landing pages, concepts, whatever it is. Do those types of things first. It's going to save you a lot of time and money in the long run to see if there's any interest around what you do. Or people might be like, oh, that's no different than this. And you're going to spend a lot of money if you don't do anything like that. And then the last thing is, again, this isn't a perfect, it's a practice. It's not perfection. It changes over time. A good position generally lasts about, probably around 2 years, maybe 2 to 3 years. The strategy could be longer than that, but I would just say, yeah, constantly evaluate it, look for opportunities, because as the market changes, you probably will need to adjust and change too, as we talked about, right? Netflix used to be, first, hey, this is our position now, but it might change over time depending on what happens. And you might have some thoughts on that, but yeah, that's what I would say as far as considerations.
Yeah, and I think that, like you said, like positioning can change, but your vision shouldn't change. And they're two different things. And I think sometimes people get that confused.
Yeah.
And so like your vision is your true north.
Mhm.
And that should be above and beyond a market, that should be above and beyond the current situation. Whereas your positioning has to take that in mind. But
Yeah.
like when you're thinking about maybe changing or even analyzing or testing your position and all of that, how can brands do that?
Yeah. Just one more point off of what you said too, which is an excellent point. It's like, think about a company like Nike, right? Like back in the day, we could literally go look at ads. It's all about the shoe. They weren't all about this hype, this vigorous and big gravitas that they have now. It was like their position was all around inventing shoes that help you run faster. And that's certainly still kind of the case, but their positioning is much different. Their positioning is all around inspiration and aspiration and identity. Whereas before it was just around the technology of their shoe, and that has changed over time. So
Also,
yeah,
Tiffany jewelry, one of the most fascinating brands to watch, because they've been around for not forever, but for a very, very long time. And they switched their brand positioning a lot.
Yeah.
But their core product hasn't changed.
Yeah.
But they also like Nike, but just I guess I'm a little more drawn towards Tiffany's than I
Yeah,
am.
that's phenomenal. Yeah.
But they are a super interesting brand too, because they do a very similar thing to Nike, obviously different audience and different messaging and all of that, but absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a wonderful example. Yeah. There's any successful company is probably going to be a good example of that. But it also should be noted too, your position doesn't have to change because your vision does stay the same. There are some brands who haven't changed their positioning in a very long time, right? GE, I think, let's say we look at them, very similar example. I can't think of tons off of the top of my head, but there's tons of companies that it's just worked for them for a long time and they don't change that. That could be fine. But to answer the question you actually asked me, right? How do we identify that? I always like to start with tangible questions. Questions are really good at just opening the mind a little bit to see these positions. So I have a few noted is, what's your opinion on what needs to change in your industry and what are you doing to change it? Because likely that's going to help you think through like, well, one, are we doing that? Have we thought through that? But if you have, it's likely going to help you find some content around that. Similar, what is the gap in the industry and how are you bridging it? So that's, again, you're going to find some unique positioning there. What does your target audience already believe to be true? Mostly because a quick note on this is it's really hard for companies to change minds. Again, let's reference back to Oatly. If Oatly, all their campaigns were telling everyone how bad regular milk is for the environment, for their bodies, for animal abuse, whatever it might be for that audience, people are very ingrained to their beliefs. So you're likely not going to change someone's mind through a billboard on a highway. In fact, you're probably going to turn them off. Like, I don't have time to think about that. But instead, they took an idea, right, that most people in that category, their target audience, believes that cow milk is not actually made or intended for human beings. So their positioning, it's like milk, but made for humans, is a masterpiece of branding and marketing, because they didn't try and change minds and convert people. They're trying to align with what people already believe to be true about milk. So same thing for your audience, whatever that is. Other two questions: what can you be first in, right? Especially in a saturated category, if you can be first in something, even if it's just framing something differently, I would encourage you to look there. And then what do you want to be known for? We've used this question in other areas too, but same goes for positioning, because people are going to see that externally. And then some resources, because we pull from tons of resources all the time. There's a book behind me called Positioning by Al Reese and Jack Trout, so that like Canadian, Jack Trout. I would highly recommend that book for anyone interested, whether you're on the brand side or the marketing side at an agency or something like that. Quite an older book, but the truths are still as true today as they were then. Marty Neumeier, anything by Marty Neumeier. There's a book called The Brand Gap, and then Zag. Both of them have similarities as far as understanding positioning and differentiation. And then we also have a positioning worksheet. If you go to our website or some of the blogs, we can maybe tag it in the comments or the links. It's a simple, it's literally a tangible exercise. You can sit down with your team and go through, or sit down with yourself and just go through kind of these pillars of how we think through positioning. How do you actually start that process? What types of things do you think through to create a sustainable, defensible, relevant, and differentiated position? So, yeah.
I really liked your conversation today. It was fun.
I really did too. These things are super fun. Always excited to talk, and excited for our next chat.
Me too. We'll see you later.
Awesome. Thanks, Amanda. Bye.
Bye.